Good afternoon. My name is Paul J. Frisco, and I am the interview coordinator for the Center for World War II Studies and Conflict Resolution here on the campus of Brookdale Community College under the directorship of Paul Zygo. This afternoon we are privileged to have with us Mr. Mauri White. Mauri, I would like you to start your story at any point you like, before the war or before the declaration of war or immediately after. Looking at the manual and the memoir that you presented here is quite impressive, so I don't know where to start. You take it from here.
Okay. I will start in May of 1940 when I went to work at Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, Long Island. I was on a team that built the very first P-47, that marvelous, marvelous plane, which I think won the war. Of course, my son doesn't agree with that. I was 20 years old at that time, and I worked for Republic Aviation for 4 years.
How old were you when you went?
I was 20 years old when I went in. I was born in 1920.
You're working for Republic Aviation.
Yeah.
Now, that was out at Long Island. And Long Island was a hotbed of the aircraft industry.
Yes, we had several of them out there. The point I was going to make I lost my train of thought.
You were talking about
I'm sorry.
That's all, don't apologize.
When I was at Republic Aviation, I was getting a series of deferments, so that when I went into the service, I was what would be considered an old man. Now, at Republic, as I said, we built the first P-47. It was a very interesting time for several reasons. Number one, while I was at Republic, well, I'm going to go back a little bit and talk about the day that Japan attacked Pearl Harbor.
Good.
Because I was sitting in my living room on a Sunday afternoon. It happened to be around noon. That we heard this over the radio. I have no reason why or what happened, but I did get dressed, and I went right out to Republic, which was about a 2-hour drive. And when I got to Republic Aviation, to our factory, cars were coming from all directions. We all came in to go to work. Now I got there.
Yet.
It's Sunday. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon when I got to Republic. Nobody had made a call at all. We just did it. This attitude of just doing it was carried out through all the time that I've been working at Republic and subsequently in my experiences in the Navy. It was a marvelous feeling. We just put it in. We'd work 7 days a week. We did whatever was necessary, and we did it. Experiences in Republic was also there. Republic, when I joined Republic, it had been a Sikorsky plant. All the blueprints were in Russian or German. I happened to have been living in Russia for my youth, from age 10 to 15, and so I knew Russian, and I was able to get along with the men who I was working with. In the early days of 1942, maybe, the FBI came into the plant because it was discovered that the P-47, which was this marvelous plane, I'm going to keep saying that, I'm sorry, there were parts of that plane that were not
Super secret.
not only super secret, but you couldn't replace them. the cowling, for example. So what they found, well, thank you. What they found was that there was a bunch of people who were sabotaging them. And overnight, most of the German engineers, foremen, people in charge, were removed from the plant. All the blueprints had to be redone so that they were in English. German was not allowed to be spoken at all. I was working at the bench, we called it the bench, and I guess I was about 21 years old at the time when I was promoted to be a group foreman. It was quite an accolade for me, being that young and working with these older men. I got along well with the Russian men, but the German men were standoffish. As I said, I was getting deferments. I was promoted to the position of industrial engineer, and so I was taken off the bench, and my job then was to identify the manufacturing procedures of each of the parts that we were doing. At this particular time, men were being taken into the services, and we were getting women, and we had an influx of women, which was they were very good. They were delightful. And we who had, in the management, quote, quote, were taking instructions on how to work with the women. It was a whole new thing. Rosie the Riveter, that's where she was in, biggest life. And we had, that gave us courses. Again, who had these girls working for her. I remember one instance when we had a woman who I always referred to as a Brunhilde. She was a big woman, and she made a big point of telling us that there's no excuse for a woman when she was having her menstrual cycle. They don't have to take time off. They have to get right back into working. This was quite an experience. In 1943, in May of 1943, I met and married my wife, and still getting the deferments. But time did come in 1944 when the services needed men. They were running out of men, so there was a moratorium. Anybody under 25 could not be deferred unless you had a physical disability, and I was 24. I volunteered for the Navy. I figured that with my experience in building airplanes, in the middle part of it, I'd rather be doing that in the Navy. I thought I'd become on the...
How long were you married when you had to go?
1 year.
1 year.
1 year to the day. I went into the Navy on my first anniversary. And I went to Sampson, New York, for boot camp.
That was a cold place, wasn't it?
Well, I was there in the summertime.
Then it was a hot place.
Well, hot was. It was huge. It was humongous. I was an old geezer at this time. I was 24, and I went in, as I said, in May of 44.
If I can, when I went into the service, I went in at 17, and when we had anybody with us that was 24, 25, we called them Pop.
Yes, and that is just, I say this as I go along here, that is true, because my interest was in what's going to happen after the war. I had never had a doubt but that I'd come out, although we had plenty of questions, my wife and I, as to whether we should get married or not at that time.
I think you made the right decision in the final analysis.
Well, come May, we'll be married 65 years.
That's great.
So I think it was a good decision. Boot camp. Boot camp was an interesting experience. Even though everybody who went into boot camp really had to be remade. We didn't have the strength that we,
That's very
when
well
we
put.
went in, that we had when we came out. We spent an awful lot of time exercising that, and also a lot of time hearing and attending lectures on what to do and what not to do, and how to find your way. When I went into the service, and I did, as I said earlier, volunteer for the Navy, because that's what I wanted, I came in with a whole raft of references from Republic Aviation and what's extolling my virtues, and that's what I hope to do. Now, I brought along a copy of my memoirs. I wrote all my memoirs of my whole life up to a period of about 6 years ago. I have here my World War memoirs from Republic Aviation until I was discharged. And with this I have also all of the documentation that I had saved during this period.
Now, when you went into the Navy at boot camp again, you were subjected to a whole series of tests.
Oh yes, physical tests, mental
Academic.
tests, ability tests. Oh yes.
And is that when your certificates of merit from the Republic came into play as to what the Navy would do?
Well,
with you?
you know, yes, but very strangely. For some reason, I did not graduate. When I graduated boot camp, I was not reassigned with the whole company. There were very few of us who were not, we just were
They put you in a
left out.
special category for
A
a
special
later
caddy, yeah,
assignment.
right, exactly.
So you went home on leave and then had to go back.
That was the whole 9 yards, yes sir, we did. In fact, I had asked my wife to come to visit. The only time we could have our wives visit was once after, about 6 weeks of service in the boot camp. Well, they sent me to, eventually, I did get my orders to go to Norman, Oklahoma.
You wonder where the heck is Norman, Oklahoma?
It's out all the way out. But the funny thing is that with all my experience and with all my papers, they said, they put me down for gunnery school, not Metalsmith school, which is what I wanted. This was a big shock to me. I didn't know how I was going to cope with that. Again, I keep repeating the 24, because now I had to worry about my subsequent career. When I got to Norman, Oklahoma, the first thing I did was, when I'm carrying that big duffel bag, the first thing I did there was to go to the Metalsmith school, and I saw the commander in charge, and I presented him with my documentation, and I said, "Sir, I am a qualified metalsmith, and they want to put me in a gunnery school." He said, "Well, if you can get the commander of the gunnery school to release you, then I'll be happy to put you in the metalsmith school." Now, I must tell you that one of the tests that we talked about in boot camp, they had a young lieutenant get up and talk to us, a whole room full of people, and he was trying to sell being a gunner on one of those slow 125-mile-an-hour planes.
But this was with the use of newly developed radar capabilities, wasn't it? What made it super special.
No.
I'm trying to sell it. by the way.
No, that's just exactly what he was trying to do.
Right.
And these planes flew at 125 miles an hour, and I said, "Hey, this is not for me." And I wrote across the application, "No way," in big, and I said, you know, I didn't give a darn at that point. Well, anyway, I went to see the commander at the ordnance school, and he reamed me out like I have never been dreamed of before. I'm standing before this man, standing at attention. Yes, sir. No, sir. I'm sorry, sir. Apologize, sir. He says, you know, you son of a gun, you could be court-martialed for it. You go completely out of rank, order, and
Chain of command.
chain of command. And finally he said, well, if commander at that Metalsmith school, who happened to be a friend of his, will accept you, then all right, get the hell out of here. You're not worth anything. So
It was
shrugged
worthwhile.
off again. I tell you, I walked miles that day in the hot sun, but I did get into Metalsmith school. And it was a thorough, very thorough training. It was an excellent school.
I'm a little bit curious now. Norman, Oklahoma, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Grumman built a huge airplane factory out there, and I don't know if Republic or any others, but I know there was a lot of activity in Norman. It was the school that you were assigned to any part of that?
No, and I don't recall there being a factory there at that time at all. Not that I know of.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
All right. My experiences at the school were good. I studied very hard. I wanted to get good grades. I wanted to learn. I'm going to have to go back a little bit. I did not graduate high school. I left before that. And I wanted to make up for it to the best of my ability at that time. And I did work hard at it. Norman, Oklahoma, in the summertime, is white hot. Hot, dry. Now, one of the rules and one of the things you have to do if you're in the Navy is you have to know how to bail out a whaleboat. That's a requirement. You cannot graduate unless you know. You have to know how to swim. Which, by the way, when I was at Sampson, I was offered an opportunity to become an instructor because I happened to be a good swimmer. But I decided I didn't want that. Well, anyway, here we are in Norman, Oklahoma. We have to bail out a boat. There's a little creek running through the grounds. No water. So they pour it in with a hose, about maybe that much water, 2 inches. 4 or 5 of us guys went in with a little tin cup and we bailed out. We learned how, that was the Navy. Again, when I graduated that school, it took a long time for them to decide where I was going to go. My wife...
Now, this is in 1944, early 45.
1940, well, it's got to be 1944. I went in 44, and then now we're coming into 45 after Christmas. My wife came out to live with me in Norman, and we had an apartment, room in a house. And that was very nice. She worked on the base. It was quite a good experience, but we didn't know where we were going to go. Finally, I cajoled and got somebody to tell me where we were going to go. I had to know where to send my wife. Well, we wound up in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania. Now, how good?
That wasn't hard to take.
That was not hard to take.
That was a big air base.
It was an air base, but it was a base where we were radar and radio was just coming out at that time, really. And this was a base where we had to work in the metal shop and the electric shop and others on installing radio and radar in all kinds of planes, mostly small planes, which they were going to use for observation purpose. And that's what we did pretty much there.
Did you have a crew of men under you, or were you?
No, I was part of a crew. There were about 15 men in our shop. We all had about the same. Well, depending on how long you were there. By this time, I was seaman first class. I had passed the necessary test, so I had the chevron. And this picture here, of course, was from boot camp.
Keep talking.
I did not have any markings on myself at that time.
But you had a wife, and I was wondering, what were you drawing a month in your Navy pay?
Oh, well, we went in, I think, at $50, and we probably were making 54.
And she was working
Oh, she
to
worked
help
in the,
to
oh, yeah,
support
oh,
you.
support herself. Remember, I was in the Navy. I got, Willow Grove. I must tell you about Willow Grove. Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, the air base, had been a country club. And so this whole thing was built around that. And we were lucky enough that the warrant officer in charge of the mess hall had been the steward for the club, golf club. So we had fine food. Our grapefruit was cored. Our eggs were fresh. It was a very, very happy
What
experience.
kind of facilities were you sleeping in?
We had
Going home?
a barracks. We had a barrack, and then, of course, my wife had
An apartment.
What we had to do, though, Willow Grove in the area, and it's a small communities.
This is just north of Philadelphia, wasn't
That's
it?
west.
West?
The first apartment we had in Willow Grove happened to be, I have a picture of that here someplace, had to be the back of a house. And you had to get into the apartment walking up a ladder on the outside of the back and into a big window on the second floor of the house, and they had this apartment. So my wife had to go climbing through in the wintertime, ice and all. A very interesting experience.
I'm a little bit curious.
Go ahead.
All during this time that you're talking about,
Mhm.
what was going on in the war, and did you pay much attention to it? And I don't mean that in a sarcastic way at all.
I understand. As much as we could, we paid attention to it. Our noses, we were working pretty hard at what we were doing, so we knew that we were doing something to help the war effort. There was no question of it. We worked, the crew that I was with worked well. We put our time in. Of course, when the bomb went off, we all heard that.
You were still at Willow Grove.
So, Willow Grove.
How did you feel when you heard that news of the
Very
first and then the
excited.
second bomb?
Very excited. I mean, heaven came to earth.
In your
Everybody was
capacity
excited.
and what you were involved in, did you have an inkling of what that bomb was all about, the power of it?
Yes, we did. Somehow, somebody knew something about it. There was a radio in our shop. The music that we always had on it stopped. An announcer came on, and then you heard this tremendous blast. So we knew that something was happening.
I'd like to take you back a little further.
Go right ahead.
I apologize again.
No problem.
How did you feel when you heard that President Roosevelt died?
Well, I felt like I lost a relative,
A friend or a relative?
as close as that. We felt, my God, what are we going to do now? We knew that we were getting close to something. We knew that we were winning the war by this time, but we were still in the war. People were still being bombed and being killed. And without Roosevelt, what do you do? President Truman had come to Republic Aviation once to give us the E for effort,
Oh, sure.
and it was on a summer day. And I remember the man, who do you ever knew about him? He was unpresupposing. He wore a leather coat and a black hat, and he stood up on a dais of some sort. We're very unimpressed by him, very unimpressed. But of course he became our president, so it turned out to be pretty good. A little aside, if I may.
Sure.
my wife became pregnant while we were living in Willow Grove area, and
That was in the winter.
no,
I'm
because on the day that Japan, the war was over in August, we found out that day that she was pregnant with her, with my daughter.
Right here.
The old lady. Hi. I'm the true baby boomer, born in 1946.
You don't look that old.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That had to be a special moment for you.
It,
Both of you.
it was a moment. We had, of course, registered to have Nina born at the Naval Yard in Philadelphia. We didn't know, after the war, from August until February, when I was finally discharged, we had no way of knowing when I would be discharged. I wasn't in the Navy long enough. I wasn't overseas, so I didn't have all the point system. And as I say in here, they knew how to get us into the Navy, but they didn't know how to get us out.
I would imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that you still had some contacts with Republic in Europe.
I had written to Republic to say I want to come back, and I do have a letter here from Republic saying, you're welcome, come back when you want to. But I had decided not to,
Okay.
for, again.
But you were confident that you'd be
had
able
job.
to provide for your wife
Oh, yes,
and child.
of course. Not only was I confident that I could go back, but I knew I was a better mechanic than when I left.
I bet you were.
Yes, very definitely, and
I'm also curious about another thing. There have been whether you were in the Navy or even when that time with Republic, you're coming into contact with people that had served overseas in Europe, Africa, the Pacific. Do you have much contact with those people?
no, not really.
Okay.
We did have contact with people people I was with me, serving the time that I was at boot camp, who were put on Liberty ships. Liberty ships around that time, the 42 or so, they started putting on a gunner in the rear. Prior to that, they didn't. And so they were taking a lot of the sailors. Most of the people from camp, from where my company, 105, went to different naval bases, and they went to sea.
The units that they were assigned to in those days, they were referred to as armed guards. They were assigned to Liberty ships and
Yeah.
merchant ships,
And we had,
command their guns.
right, and we had men who were on a ship, went out, and almost the day after they were out at sea, the ship was sunk, they came back. So we had that, but not too many. I mean,
You were fortunate, again.
amen. Very fortunate.
It sounds like you had a charmed life, that you were able to find a position with Republic and do something very important for the war effort, even though it was not a combat
Well,
position.
I think
It was just as important as anything else. And the fact that you did make that major contribution is very important. When you went into the Navy, you were allowed to, through your efforts, to stay in that same field. Now, when you came out, where did you go to?
Well, having decided I wasn't going to go back to Republic Aviation, and I was not confident, well, I was going to have a baby, for one thing. We were going to have a child, and I didn't have enough confidence in myself at that particular time to go to take advantage of the GI Bill, which was a dumb thing, but that's the mistake I made. And for about 3 years, I went through living hell. I had different jobs, different opportunities, tried this, that, and the other thing. And I hit a low point, absolute low point. And then, in 1949, I was offered a position at at Bantam Books start a little sales and warehousing opportunity for them. And I eventually became the vice president of sales for Abandoned Books.
You did very well.
Well, I worked myself up. I am proud of the fact that I think I am one of the last self-made men. I'm not ashamed to say that, because that's what I did. After 1949, I've had nothing but executive positions. And fortunate, we had a good life with my wife. We have 4 marvelous children who are all with us now. And I have been able to use my own talents. Oh, by the way, I did get my GED. Yeah, I did get that. Yeah, I should have gone to college, but I didn't. But I have a doctorate for my son. All my kids went to college, including my wife. Went back to school when she was in her 50s. So I think I've done all right
I think you
for
did.
my family, and then of course myself.
In the Navy parlance, you did 4-0. You did very well.
I'm very proud of having been in the Navy, though. I must say that. To me, it's a shining thing in my life.
In conclusion,
Yes, sir.
was there any one person or group of people that made a lasting impression upon you?
The chief you're talking about in the Navy?
Whatever.
Oh, well, for one, the chief at Willow Grove, my chief, he made I have an impression with him. I guess the almost president of Abandoned Books made an impression on me, Sidney Kramer. I learned a lot from him.
I think the most important thing that you got out of your weaning years in your service was the fact that you knew how to read what was going on about you and what it took to get the job done. And with or without a college education, you not only were able to compete, but you were able to go beyond what the normal person would have endured. So there's a lot to be said for what you accomplished. And I want to thank you very much for coming and sharing your story with us. It's a real pleasure.
Very much. My pleasure for being here. And am I leaving this with you?
That's for them, yeah.
That's my understanding. It's
Yes,
gonna